We're going live on YouTube as we speak. Fantastic. And so it is a pleasure for me to welcome all of you this afternoon to our EU40 AMA, which is the Ask Me Anything of EU40. You see a lot of familiar faces. People are joining in. Feel free to turn on your camera. This is a new format that EU40 has thought of, which is trying to bridge the gap between politics, civil society, various stakeholders, and also try to bring everyone in a more comfortable situation than the always 2 hours webinar where people talk for long. So I will not talk for long. I just want to welcome happily Dan Taylor, who is the Global Managing Director for Global Ads at Google. He is live from New York City, so hi Dan. Eva Kaili, member of the European Parliament and president of EU40, will join us shortly. And she has been kind enough to accept to do an introduction. She will do it a tiny bit later on the topic, how the topic is framed in the European Parliament. I would also like to welcome Vlad George. He is a member of the European Parliament who started in November for the Renew Europe group. He's from Romania, so he's going to ask a few questions to Dan. He was telling me before, he's actually happy because when it comes to advertisement, we're always, as the users, the one responding to it. So this time we'll be able to actually ask a few questions ourselves. I give you a quick info on the rules of the game. So Dan is an expert when it comes to advertisement. He is really the go-to guy when it comes to everything that you actually see on Google platforms in terms of ads. What I would like to tell you is that today is an Ask Me Anything related to this topic. So kindly keep the topic well in mind when you asking questions. You can ask questions through different ways. I see Eva just joined. Hi, Eva. I will give you the floor very shortly, Eva. I'm just explaining the rules of the game. So you can mainly ask questions in 3 ways. You can either write me a message on the chat of Zoom. You can go to Slido. I will type it in the chat. You can use the code EU40 AMA, and you can ask questions there. There are already a few, and I will propose those questions later. Or the other way around is that you write me in the chat, hey, Alessandro would like to ask a question live, and it is on this topic. And when that time will arrive, I will give you the floor. You will unmute yourself, and you will be able to ask your question to Dan or to include Eva and Vlad to the conversation. Now, without further ado, I talked even too much. So I would love to leave the floor to Eva, who's going to give us a very brief introduction. Thank you very much, Eva, for being here on the world of advertisements, digital ads, and what the Parliament has been all about it in the past few years. So thank you, Eva. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessandro, and thank you, Dan, for joining, and everyone who is with us today. Actually, I have to say that Alessandro and EU40 has been one of the platforms that proposes and delivers the best and most interesting topics. So this is like actually one of the highlights of what I've been discussing the last months. So as you all know, the European Parliament is quite active into discussing artificial intelligence and the DSA and the DMA legislation and the new competition tools. So it's not just timely, but the way that everything is being set up by EU40 and Alessandro's work, it's quite fascinating, and it always keeps us very interested. So let me also add that during the pandemic, we saw suddenly a big shift, a transition to not just working online, but accelerating the fact of digitalization and understanding the transformative power of new technologies. And this actually brought more MEPs, more politicians into the world of legislation for new technologies. So as also you know, we are now 27 member states, and one of the reasons that this happened, we think it's a Cambridge Analytica, and this was also a wake-up call for Europe that said we need to understand if perceptions are being manipulated by political advertisements. And since I went through a political campaign last year, I saw the improvement and transparency in the rules that we had to follow to post online and to be able to have control and understanding of the spending, so the targeting of citizens. And it was useful not just for me to have a set of rules, but also to understand how everybody around me was using social media. So now more than ever, we realize that online advertisement is becoming really powerful. I know that it's Google's business model, but several platforms. And I was also talking to a friend of mine in US who's working with legislation, and he told me, you're attacking US from EU. I was like, no, we're not attacking US. We just want to see some regulation being updated, because for the last 20 years, we are trying to fit a new economy into the old boxes. So now we are trying to understand, redefine what we mean by competition law and privacy, and translate our digital rights, our human rights in Europe into digital rights. And this is something very important. And under the pandemic, we saw that some countries like China forced not, I think Dan, that would definitely know, forces the big players, the gatekeepers, to leave their data in data servers of China. They're controlled by the government. So privacy is compromised to achieve safety, or this is what they're being told. We have a different mentality and different culture, and we want to have both. So we want to be able to achieve both. We understand we need to compromise always part of our privacy, give away data to get a more personal experience, but at the same time, we want citizens that they have freedom of choices. They will not be socially ranked or excluded, and they need to have more options and alternatives. So I think this is the beginning of why I was interested in trying to understand how we can do that without blocking the big platforms, because I'm using all the Google tools, I'm using Facebook, I'm using all the social media, and this helped me be elected and, let's say, overcome the barriers of having to enter the traditional media. So since they helped me, I really appreciate that, but I think we have to balance again this relation and make sure that we have the right framework to move forward in the future, since concentration of power brings also a lot of responsibility. So this is how where we're standing, and I believe everybody knows the upcoming legislation. We have a working program that's quite important. It has the Digital Services Act, the Data Markets Act, and the new competition tool and artificial intelligence ethical framework that's going to be binding by law, at least by its main principles, the main core. And we had already 3 files: liability, IP rights, and ethics presented. So the intentions we have, I've been working on similar files since 2017. And now I think we are moving forward into having a more clear legal framework, like, let's say, an updated GDPR. So I think we can find ways to work together and have a common understanding, because in the end, I might not be a politician in 4 years, and you might not work in Google in 4 years, and Alessandro might be older than 40 in 10 years. So it would be nice to look behind us and say, okay, we did it right, and we feel safe, and the environment is trustworthy, and our democracies are safe. So we did something that we should have done, and be proud of that. I think this would be the part we want to achieve. So now we can, of course, Alessandro, I don't know if you want to proceed with some questions that I can start asking Dan, or if you should take some initial remarks to respond, but we can go into the details and the small contradictions or huge contradictions that we have to respond to during our legislative period, and especially when the Data Markets Act arrives. So
no,
thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, Eva. I will actually be 40 exactly in 10 years. So I truly agree. We should look back and look back to our past with a bit of pride and the things that we have achieved. I would suggest now that we leave Dan 5 minutes for his introduction. He explains to us what he does on an everyday basis. And then we will have a couple of questions from Eva, a couple of questions from Vlad, who's a newly elected member of the European Parliament as well. And then we open the floor to everyone else. So Dan, he's live from New York, so good morning to you. And please give us an understanding of what you do and who you are in the end.
Great. Thank you, Alessandro, and thank you, Eva, for the opening remarks. I agree with so much that you said there. As you mentioned, I am Dan Taylor. I'm a managing director in our Google's global advertising business. I largely focus on our business strategy for advertiser solutions in display and video advertising. But I also focus on our privacy strategy in ads and thinking about the needs of consumers, publishers, and advertisers in that vein. Before Google, I spent about 15 years in traditional advertising media, so radio and television, et cetera. And so I'll just have a couple of things I'd love to open up with. And I do want to prioritize the question and answer period, since watching previous episodes of the Ask Me Anything, that's actually the whole purpose. And so, broadly speaking, advertising has been around for thousands of years, even way back when I was 30 years old. An advertiser, from my perspective, is always trying to reach a relevant audience or a specific context that makes sense, such that they can communicate their message to people who are open to their products or their services. And publishers broadly define everything from a newspaper or a magazine, a television station, and even more recently in the digital age, websites and apps. They provide access to an audience either through subscriptions, advertising, and a combination of both. As the web took hold, 20 plus years ago, businesses of all sizes began to establish themselves on the web, whether it was shopping or entertainment, news, special interests. And in the majority of instances, consumers expected that content to be freely available, and an ad-supported model quickly became the prevailing model on the web. And so the early days of online advertising, including times with Google, banner ads were really like the billboards of the internet on high traffic websites. If you wanted to catch eyeballs as they were perusing content, that was a great way to go. Early search ads were reminiscent of classified ads, and you could find things based on category. Contextual advertising was really about like sections of a newspaper. So if you wanted to advertise golf clubs, you'd be on a golfing or a sports website. But as consumers really divided their time across millions of websites, advertisers really struggled to reach the right audiences, and publishers really struggled to attract enough attention outside of the large portals, and they sought more effective ways to connect to those audiences. And so technology, and a lot of the conversation around privacy and around the phrase ad tech was really built up to serve the needs of advertisers and publishers to try and reach those audiences and enable a freely accessible web. This helped advertisers reach their audiences, and it also helped publishers monetize their content, whether they were a single blogger all the way up to a large multinational newspaper. And so Google's mission in all of this, more broadly, is to make all the world's information freely accessible and useful. And because of that, and because of the ad-supported model, we took a very vested interest in making sure that an ad-supported model was successful in growing the web. It's one of the main reasons we got involved in the advertising business ourselves. not just for our own properties like Google.com and YouTube, but also to support publishers across the web and across the apps ecosystem. And so today, advertising on the web still adheres to the basic tenet of connecting advertisers and publishers, and consumers benefit from relevant ads, but also largely free or low-cost content at their fingertips from anywhere in the world. But the technology that underlies it has evolved, including the use of things like cookies, which seem to be in the center of a lot of conversations right now about privacy and regulatory changes. And I tend to think about cookies as a technology that has been in place for a long time, and two different categories of cookies that I like to try and think about. The first one is we talked about a first-party cookie, which largely is one that's owned by the publisher. It's only used on that website or the app that you're visiting. So if you think about an experience where your preferences or the type of content that you like to watch is saved, or if you go to a commerce website and your shopping cart that you left alone the last time you visited is still full, or you have recommendations on videos that you'd like to watch. That largely is driven by a first-party cookie to help understand who a consumer is when they come to the site. Are they logged in? Have they visited before? What sorts of things can make their experience on the website or app better? The second is a third-party cookie, and this is really one that's been largely used by technology companies, not just in the advertising space, but in the the analytics space and the fraud protection space and measurement and more. And this is really helping understand how valuable marketing services are in the digital landscape. Did an advertisement that I showed on a particular website ultimately lead to a purchase or to an increase in interest in a brand, for example? And can I use that technology also to make sure that I'm not continuing to show ads to a consumer that's seen them enough and either took action or didn't take action and don't want to see those ads anymore? As I mentioned, increasingly the cookie landscape is a lot of where we're spending our time as an industry thinking about how do we evolve that technology over the next 10 years, because quite frankly, they're at the center of consumer concerns about privacy online. What data is collected, how it's used, and who it's shared with. Regulatory changes and platform changes, including browsers, have really risen to meet these rising consumer concerns. But we believe there's more to be done here. We have a few big bets at Google that we're leaning into to ensure both the health of an ad-supported web, but also privacy that exceeds the expectations of consumers.
Dan, maybe we can dive into that exactly through the questions, because I have the feeling that we will have a lot of them, and we have you for such a short period of time that we want really to dive in. So thank you very much. I believe that cookies are something that we will discuss later as well, because it's maybe hard to understand and to grasp for me, at least, as a member of the common people, let's say. Eva, I'll give you the floor for your first couple of questions, and maybe we can do 2 questions at once, so Dan answers, and then I'll give the floor to Vlad. Eva, please feel free to.
So I would take the last sentence, actually, when you started talking about like privacy and safety. Dan, you're very experienced, and you understand also the challenges that we face, because when we didn't do anything to regulate because we thought we should allow innovation to happen and then make smart legislation, we were a bit late to impose GDPR. And now we want to do it again in a proper way. So we see now more than ever that the feeling of surveillance through the data, it's becoming a big discussion. And I wouldn't say it's just for products and consumer services. I would say basically it's about the potential threat of being excluded, of having your data being used to exclude you from services, from the access, even the access itself to the internet, from not understanding that when I'm Googling something, Google is actually also searching me. They're learning who I am and what I want. And this could manipulate my perception to a point that I think I have a freedom of choice, but do I? And in every event that I go on AI, they ask me this, so like, will I have the freedom of choice? Or in the end, will they tell me who I should even date? So people are scared that they don't have the freedom of choice that they had before. Even now, when I'm going to my sister and I'm like driving there like twice a week, I check my Google Maps to make sure there will be no traffic. So I'm trusting Google for something that I already know, in case they can predict that I would be late and I should change my route. So we are outsourcing our trust. So my question would be, under the legislation you've seen coming, what do you think should be left for the companies to do? Like, what's the part that you believe, and what maybe are the steps that you've done to limit these harmful effects of micro-targeting and political advertising? And what do you think should be left for the regulation to do and achieve, especially in maybe how much personalization would you consider should be balanced? Because I feel 100% personalization is confusing people by understanding the reality in a different way that you understand the reality. So I would like to have your view on that.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Eva. A couple of things along that question. The first one is, much like any consumer service or business, when you provide information to a company that you want to work with, the better that experience becomes, right? So even if you walk in, it feels weird to say walk into a retail store in 2020, but if you walk into a retail store, you talk about the colors that you like or the size that fits well. And so as you give information to the salesperson in the store, for example, they can then show you products and accessories and things like that that will be most likely to meet your needs. And the same is generally true in digital. And so the example that you gave on Google Maps. And so if we have a good understanding of the routes that you most frequently travel, we may send you a traffic alert if you need to leave for your sister's, for example, and you go there twice a week. There might be a good reminder to say, hey, you may need to leave about 10 minutes early. But at the same time, it's not required to share that information in order to get access to a service. And so, on the Google consumer product sides in particular, like we like to have consumers who log in because we can give them better services, more relevant videos to watch, more custom search results, so that if you search for Apple and you're a computer technology wizard, we're more likely to surface some computer-driven results versus some fruit results. And so that type of information really helps make our services better. But we also make sure that our services can be accessed without so much of that information. And so there's incognito mode. You don't have to log into our products. You can choose not to have ads personalization. And a big tenet for us, and to get to the heart of your question, is making sure that we provide both transparency into the data that's collected for executing our business services, our consumer services, and our advertising services, but then also the ability to control and make changes to that information. And you can do that today through Google's My Account, but increasingly we're trying to present those choices in the moment as you're navigating Maps or as you're navigating YouTube, for example. And you may have seen some of those prompts that just say, hey, like the reason we're showing this video is X. Turn that on, turn that off, show me more, show me less. In terms of your last question, in terms of what should the role of regulation be in these steps, I think a lot of the challenges that we have seen with regard to privacy and legislation, you began to speak about things like the surveillance via data and the threat of exclusion. I think a lot of those challenges are driven by monitoring behavior across sites, right? So you go to a website here and an app here and a third website over here, and technology companies using third-party cookies, for example, can get a really good idea of the types of things that you're interested in, even though you didn't give express permission necessarily to have that profile built. You visited one website and gave them some information, another website for different information. And so increasingly, we're really focused on reducing and limiting the amount of cross-site tracking that takes place. And we'll probably end up talking a bit more about that when we talk about initiatives like the Chrome Privacy Sandbox, where we're trying to reduce the amount of cross-site tracking that consumers just haven't been able to understand despite transparency and controls being available, and we want to take that a step further. Where I think that the danger in regulating very tightly in that space is that there's a line and there's an area where there's basic information that a website owner or an app owner or a publisher needs to know in order to deliver foundational services and represent their audiences and make sure that they understand what content is the most effective. And these are things like analytics cookies and some of the first party data, like when you're on a one-to-one relationship with a site or app, that I think is pretty important for the industry to self-regulate versus treating all of those sort of technology spaces the same.
Thanks, Dan. On the targeted ads or contextualized ads, I will have a question later because it comes from Slido. But first, let me give the floor to Vlad, and then we will go back to Eva if she has any other follow-up question. Vlad, please, the floor is yours.
So, hi Dan again. Hello all. So, I'm a lawyer. I'm a new MEP, but I'm a lawyer since forever now. And I've been also involved in some startups, Romanian startups. We are kind of good. We have a good market in the IT area. So I've been working with a startup that mixes. It has a hybrid between AI and human intelligence in order to analyze raw data. And I saw these days that Google is having such a system also, and it tests it. And I can relate also to the question that was before. And I have to say that I'm a lawyer, but now I'm also a politician. So like I think every politician, especially young politicians, I've been using the ads a lot in my campaigning. And if there wasn't such a tool, I think I would have not been able to reach as many people as I did. But these questions rise up. So the using of a tool means that you have to be also responsible. So my question is this, then. How is Google currently ensuring that users, no matter their education, age, and digital literacy, effectively do understand how their personal data is collected and used by Google and other advertisers, including in political campaigns, let's say? And if we reverse the medal, how to make sure that their freedom of speech and creativity do not get limited in the process?
Great, thanks, Vlad, for that question. So a couple of things there. Maybe I'll start with where you ended, which is how do we ensure that consumers, regardless of their education level or digital literacy, understand how ads are being served to them or presented to them in the ads ecosystem. And so that's an area that is personally very important to me as well. We just got through another uncomfortably exciting election here in the United States. And the area that we're really focused on here, and I mentioned this a little bit with Eva, is to obviously provide as much transparency as possible to consumers, but not to overwhelm them with transparency, right? So if you're not digitally literate per se, for example, having a website way over here, if you happen to know the URL for it to go find information, isn't all that useful. And so where we really focus a lot of energy is putting more of that information directly into the ad as it's served. And so the vast majority of ads that Google serves, whether they're on our owned and operated properties or through some of the ad technology services that we offer to advertisers, have the ability for a consumer to see not only who the advertiser is, but why that ad was served to them, and be able to take action within that ad, such as, I don't want to see ads from that provider anymore. And so we call that colloquially about this ad. And so in most display and video ads, as well as search ads on our properties, there's a small icon. We can't really make it huge, or else the advertisement itself will be obscured, that consumers can mouse over or tap on, and they can see that information readily and then take action on it in the moment. The other thing, very specific to things like misinformation and elections and things like that, is that we're very focused on showing and verifying every advertiser legal name and location, and making that available in every advertisement globally as well. And so that's an effort that we kicked off last year, in addition to some of the things that we already provided, which is the advertiser name and why the ad was served. And so we're going to continue to develop those services to make sure that consumers can see, where did this ad come from, and try and make that as intuitive as possible. And reinforcing, again, doing that in the moment, I think is far more critical than ever before, as opposed to having like an ad library or something like that that someone would have to take the initiative to go out and find.
Super, thanks Dan. So mindful of time, I would suggest that we try to answer as many questions as possible, and so we will try to be as concise as possible as well while asking questions. I have a few on Slido, so I will ask one on Slido, and then Eva, if you want to jump in, and then I see that Alexandre has a question. So going back to what you were mentioning before, Dan, and this is a bit of what both Eva and Vlad mentioned, they have used during their campaign as well. Advertisement works best when you target a certain audience. My question is, what kind of data, which is a question from Slido, what kind of data do you use in order to target? And what is the difference between targeted and non-targeted ads? So if you could please shortly give me your 2 cents.
Sure, I will. I'll take that in a couple of buckets, and I'll try to speak both about Google and then the broader industry at large, because some of the practices are pretty consistent across the industry. Generally speaking, when you're on a website of any kind, ads that are served directly by that website tend to be driven by their understanding of what you've shared with them in terms of your experience on the website. So if you're logged into The Guardian, for example, and you've given them demographic or household income information, or you typically gravitate towards the business section when you visit The Guardian, the ads that you see that are served by The Guardian use that relevant information in order to merchandise that to advertisers and say, here's someone who is, in the 35 to 54-year-old age demographic who reads a lot of business news. And so if you're interested in that audience, when that when that group of consumers or that cohort visits our website, we can show you ads that are more relevant to that audience, as opposed to running the ad to everyone that visits the website. And so that's one of the things that I think is relatively unique. And I'll stick with the newspaper example for a minute about the digital advertising experience versus, say, a printed newspaper, and being able to have a print edition, if you will, specific to an advertiser's intended audience. And so that is typically in like the normal first-party perspective. And so if you think about Google's products and services, the videos you watch on YouTube help us understand what you're interested in, or the searches that you do on google.com help us understand what type of search ad results that we show. And so typically that information is limited to the publisher that is used. The second is when you get involved in sort of ad technology itself. So this is when you're working with an ad network or a demand-side platform and things of that nature. And in that instance, when publishers work with an ad technology provider like that, they contribute information into a co-op of sorts that helps buyers who are interested in reaching audiences across a wide variety of websites and apps. Say, like, I've got people who are interested in business news, and I'll use that example again. And then they will get that information from multiple websites, and then be able to deliver that audience at scale to an advertiser trying to reach that audience, whether or not they're on that particular business article at that moment in time. And so historically, it's either based on the information that you get or that a publisher gets when they're using that service or that app, and then in an advertising technology, it's around sharing that information for more broad use across the web.
Super, thanks, Dan. I know there is Alex that wants to go, and then I guess Eva. So Alex, if you can briefly propose your question, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm a professor at the University of Namur, and I want to ask you something. Brin and Page wrote in this famous paper when they present PageRank that they expect that ad-funded search engine will be biased towards advertiser and not the need of consumer. So they wrote that in their famous paper in '97. And so I would like to know how you deal with this, what they call an inherent bias towards advertiser and away from the need of consumer. How you deal with that now, with your technology now?
I'll confess I'm not sure the exact paper that you're referencing, but I'll try to answer the question as it was conveyed to me. And so I think the question was, how do we address bias in search results? Is that the essential question? Okay. I mean, generally speaking, and I think I heard the phrase PageRank, which really takes me back. That was the initial algorithm that helped sort search results and list them by relevance. And historically, PageRank at its most basic utilized a long-held academic tenet, which is the number of websites that link towards a given web page tend to be a great signal that it's an authoritative source and a credible source. And so that was a major signal that went into PageRank to show what pages we deemed were most relevant. And that was done algorithmically as opposed to being done by human editors. And so a lot of that information is really driven by consumer behavior and by publisher behavior and by just the web community writ large, sort of sending signals to Google's search engine on which pages sort of the community at large or the wisdom of the crowds, if you will, are the most authoritative. And as I think was mentioned in the previous question, as technologies evolve, whenever you build a technology, there's going to be people who try to work around said technology to either improve their standing or spread different types of information. And so it's long been a combination of both algorithmic as well as human review, as well as technology when we can detect maybe when the systems are trying to be gamed a little bit. So I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question, but hopefully it did.
Thanks, Dan, for this. I take one question from Slido. Nicholas is asking us, and Eva has worked a lot on this, the GDPR file in the previous Parliament, and I'm sure Vlad will have the pleasure in the next years to pick it up in the European Parliament. The question is, how did advertisement change according to GDPR? And also, what I would add to this is whether you have two very different, you have two very different regulations between the European Union and the rest of the world when it comes to privacy, when it comes to GDPR. So my question is, how do you make sure that you protect the citizens no matter where they are in the world? What are your checks that Google has when it comes to advertisement?
Sure, I'll try to answer that. So with GDPR, well, first of all, I think that GDPR, perhaps goes without saying, was landmark legislation, was really important for the evolution of the web and for digital advertising, and really just digital overall, to really put the needs of the consumer front and center. And as I mentioned previously, giving that level of transparency and control to the consumer so that they know what data is being used, whether it's being collected, and to give them a choice over that. And so we committed, very early to comply with GDPR, and we made changes to our own products to make sure that when consumers visit our products. They're making clear choices about what data is shared before it's collected, and we saw that as a core tenet before GDPR, and continue to propagate that in our own products. How I've seen that in the overall advertising landscape is that publishers of all sizes are obtaining consent for the collection of information, and whether that's through the ads personalization or whether it's through the purposes of legitimate interest for things like measurement. And I think that we've moved in the right direction, but quite honestly, I think as an industry, we still have a lot of work to do. And so if you think about the comment made earlier around levels of digital literacy, like just seeing like a cookie banner pop up that says, "I accept," and then more choices, for example. And then behind the more choices are like the 400 companies that they're agreeing to share data with when they click "I accept." And so I think somewhere between raising that level of transparency and giving consumers control and doing it in such a way that it's simple and easy to understand is where the next milestone as an industry I think that we need to take. In terms of how we think about things broadly, Google is a global company. Our privacy policy is global. And so while we adhere to the local regulations that are required, we believe that the principles behind that are across the board. And so there was obviously legislation in the US and the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, which took a similar approach, but slightly different, more of an opt-out of ads personalization, for example, versus an opt-in, which is the case with GDPR. And so we complied with that. Our main focus is to make sure that we're building infrastructure that both protects the needs of consumers, but is also flexible to adapt to the requirements of different localities. And so that's an ongoing dialogue that we have as we look at LGPD in Brazil and other emerging legislation that's happening everywhere. Our general concept is GDPR was a really important benchmark for the rest of the world to view, and there's only going to be more regulation of that ilk moving, and we're adapting to that rapidly and proactively in many cases.
We Europeans have raised the bar, we can say, and now everyone will have a sort of to follow.
In many ways, you set the bar, right? So yeah.
let's put it this way. I know Vlad has to leave us, so thank you very much, Vlad, for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for watching, for listening. Thank you, Dan, for being here. And I'm sure this is a big subject that will come before the European Parliament and in many national legislature also. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Vlad, for being here. I have one more question from Slido, and then as there are no more questions from the audience, I will give the floor to Eva to close the discussion. So you mentioned earlier sandboxes, which is also something that someone on Slido mentioned anonymously. I have to be genuinely honest, I have no idea what we're talking about. So if you can explain to a non-expert, what are you talking about and how this can be beneficial before we close?
Sure, absolutely. This is probably the most important initiative that I'm involved in day to day right now. And so as we talked about at the opening of this session, cookies and that technology that really evolved to support an ad-supported internet over the course of the last 20 years have some really useful technology in terms of measuring ads and making sure that they're delivering results for publishers and advertisers, fraud prevention and things like that. But a lot of the cross-site tracking that consumers are so worried about is also enabled by cookies. And so over the course of the last few years, browsers writ large have been looking at how do they make the use of cookies embedded in a browser more secure. And so, Apple has made changes, Firefox has made changes, Google has made changes, but the industry at large has generally decided that this is a technology that needs to be phased out over time. Where we can make them more secure, but ultimately we need a better alternative for 2020 for whatever the next 20 years brings us. And so there's a consortium of web browsers. It's an open source consortium called the W3C that's been around since Tim Berners-Lee and the initial World Wide Web. And Chrome, which is Google's web browser, presented a set of proposals roughly a year ago, a little bit more, that talked about how can we move the internet from or the ad-supported internet, from one that's driven by cookies and cross-site tracking that is broadly shared to many different companies and hard to control, to one that enables key advertising use cases and key publisher use cases, but protecting user privacy in a much stronger way. And so the sandboxes themselves, or what we call it, the initiative is called the Privacy Sandbox, is an effort to develop new standards for the web, not just for Google, whereby we can enable an ad-supported web that is more privacy by default. And so what that means in layman's terms is how can we enable effective, relevant advertising and effective, relevant measurement without sharing any user-level information. And so if you think about the browser as your own personal way of navigating the web, how can the browser act as more of a user agent and then help publishers and advertisers versus just being a pass-through for all of that information? And so we're in the midst of pursuing several different proposals for basic use cases like relevant ads targeting, fraud prevention, and measurement that we're really excited about and have made some progress on, and we're hoping to see develop as a standard, not just among browsers, but among the ad community at large. And so we're working, very deeply with the industry as well as our own ads teams. This is our biggest bet right now in advertising.
Quite overarching. So thanks a lot. Cookies and sandboxes. I have the feeling you have great fantasy when you think about the names as well. So look, Dan, on behalf of U40 and myself, I would like to thank you very much for being here and being so available to answer our question. And of course, I would love to leave the floor to our wonderful Eva for the final remarks. And also thank you very much to all the participants. Eva, the floor is yours.
I would have remarks, but basically ending up with a question to Dan so that he would do the closing. And I want to thank you, Alessandro, because I will not speak again to thank you again for great events that you're organizing. So there's been, there are a lot of documentaries in Netflix driving the discussion around control of data and how the new order should be, the digital rights, and what we want to have, what is the choice we're going to make in Europe, US, and China. I take that as the three biggest markets, of course. So I heard you said the opt-out and opt-in as choices, and then that, of course, you get consent to use data. But we understand that we are not all the same. I mean, Alessandro, who grew up with new technologies, he has a better understanding on how his data are being used. Well, my mom, I talk about my sister and my mom today, that's funny. So when my mom is using it, when she gives consent, she doesn't exactly understand how their data are being used, or when she sees advertisements, she could be confused about the content and feel that I'm watching the same thing. So sometimes she comes to me and asks me if I saw the same, and I haven't. So because of the responsibility that you have, since when Google became a pioneer and a gatekeeper, it was very difficult to regulate. It was not maybe understandable. And now to have competition and to give more options to citizens is not something we can succeed easily. But I think to have a more democratic internet, this would also should be the case. And data are being used across services and products. So we will try to let's say, set some standards and some principles there. But because I believe this should be a collaborative work, as I said, because I'm like, I love the services that the biggest players provide because they can provide them. I was wondering if you could identify what are the options that you would like to add to the ones that are existing already, because yes and no. I mean, if you don't say consent, then you don't have access, is not really an option. So we would call for more options based on a better understanding and having a clear consent for how to use data, how to collect them, how to store them, for how long, and how to use them. And this needs to be grandma friendly, actually, not even mother friendly. So it had to be understandable. Because I spoke to a professor of Bristol for artificial intelligence, and he was telling me they're experimenting to understand behaviors and moods and prevent suicides, which is like really important. So you use data to avoid harmful behavior, but at the same time, they could also change the mood of someone who was Googling negative words. So it becomes very powerful. So the responsibility you're getting, it's really, maybe it's too big for you to even want it. So my question would be, are you working on finding ways to have more options on the data governance for citizens, or self-regulate, like not to use them across services, and make sure that by default they will be safe for privacy and for manipulation, because you never know who can hack your services in the future, and we have to make sure it's going to be trustworthy and valuable for all. Thank you again, because we need knowledgeable people, and thank you for talking to us, because I know it's not easy to talk to politicians under all this legislative burden that's coming to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Eva. I'll try to address that to the degree that I can. I think the first answer, the first part of your question, which was around how can we make things like consent or the experience that someone has on the internet more understandable, right? What is the exchange for the content that I'm seeing? Am I sharing data? Am I subscribing to something? Am I filling out a survey, for example? The short answer is we are absolutely experimenting constantly around that line between giving as much transparency as possible, but also making it as understandable as possible. And that is a trade-off, right? Like, I could give gobs of information that wouldn't actually make it more understandable for a consumer. And so thinking about, we do a ton of user experience research around, what resonates, what sort of things are explainable and lead for someone to think about one choice versus another. And so we're constantly looking at that. We're also experimenting with things like consent management overall, right? So we have a publisher side of our business where we're providing tools to publishers to help them think about what are the different ways that you can introduce, I think you had said, options or choices for a consumer that wants to get access to information. Saying, no, I don't agree, and then being blocked from the content, we don't think that's a great experience, and I don't think any publisher really wants to go that route either. But is it the ability to subscribe? Is it ability for micropayments? Is it ability to have an ad-supported web, which tends to be the prevailing model today? How can we present those choices in such a way that aren't exclusionary for people that don't have the means to subscribe to every publisher they want to see, but also still enable these publishers to monetize, right? So that the vast majority of publishers are not charities, right? So there has to be some simple exchange that consumers can understand. So hopefully that helped answer the question.
Thanks a lot, Dan, and thank you, Eva, for the question. I have the feeling that we have a long road ahead of us, but that cooperation between all of the parties will make the internet safer, from advertisement to privacy, and I think that politics can help the civil society, as well as the civil society can help politics understand this. So this would be my take. If there are no other arguments or final remarks, once again, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, Eva. And thanks, Alexandra, and all the people that asked questions on the chat and Slido. This was a new experience for you, Forti. Let's say it's the second episode. We try to bring together a variety of people that do not necessarily are together in the same room oftentimes. So having said that, thanks a lot again, and have a wonderful evening.